You are going to love this episode if you are ready to shake up your podcast. We are talking about so many things that are going to just blow your mind. Travis leaves nothing behind. He's the host of Travis Makes Friends. He's also the founder and CEO of Guestio, connecting podcast hosts to amazing guests. And today we are talking about the power of the pause. He just took his first 2-month off break, meaning not posting episodes for a full 2 months on his show, even though he's been preaching consistency for the last 5 years that he's been podcasting. He's sharing all the nitty-gritty details that relit that spark inside him to make him not pod fade out and shut down his old show. We're also talking about strategies to grow and realistically the best way to grow in 2023. And it's not what you expect. There are so many amazing nuggets in here that I will be using to grow this podcast and my other show that I know you're going to want to stick around. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast about podcasting, where you guessed it, we're talking all things podcasting, but not just in the sense of strategy of how to launch, grow, and monetize your show. Of course, you're going to get that, but we're going deep into how podcasting can actually help you build your community, build your confidence, and if you're willing to lean deep into this platform, it can be the ticket to the life of your dreams, because it'll inspire you to go deeper, to get to know yourself. And as we know, success starts from within. If you are ready to stop being a ripple in this world and bust out your tsunami of change you know you were made for, it's podcasting for your soul. I'm your host, Jen Dragonette, so let's dig in. Let's give a big welcome to Travis, the host of Travis Makes Friends, founder and CEO of Guestio, connecting podcast hosts to amazing guests, including you, which is how we met. And you're actually one of my mentors because I got to experience working with you in a group setting last year, being a guest expert, and I learned so much. So welcome to the show.
Good. I'm glad. It's always helpful to know that some of the stuff you say actually makes sense to people. So I appreciate you having me.
It actually made a ton of sense to me, which is why I'm really excited that we're talking right now and we didn't talk last year, is because you just rebranded your show to Travis Makes Friends instead of Build Your Network. Yep. And I love your mission behind it. But can you tell my audience a little bit about the difference between, as you were going through this, the Build Your Network, now it's Travis Makes Friends, but it's kind of the same but different. Yeah.
For 800 episodes, we were Build Your Network. And that's really how I got my start in podcasting, was through that show. And when I first started, it was basically like, hey, everybody telling me, niche down, niche down, niche down, niche down. And so that's what I did. And I picked the niche of networking and like, hey, this is how you build relationships that will benefit you in your career, benefit you in your entrepreneurial ventures. And it was very, very, like I said, very niche topic. And as the show started growing, we kind of we didn't abandon the original theme. We were no longer only talking about networking in a lot of senses, but the name of the show was still called Build Your Network. And so it was just kind of confusing, I think, for maybe potential listeners and things. And then I just got really bogged down with it. We started building the business, and the business started taking a ton of time. And when I looked at interviews on my calendar that weren't super exciting to me, I was just doing them because I knew I had to continue releasing content, and it just became a drag on my time, a drag on my energy. People could tell my listenership was going down for the first time. It was just like a lot of stuff was just like, man. So it got to the point where, look, we need to kill this thing, or I need to do what I really want to do with it finally, and do something that I'm going to really enjoy doing. And so that was the reason for the rebrand. We thought about the name for a really long time. I have entire notes thing full of like 35 different names that we were considering for it. And ultimately we went with Travis Makes Friends because my team kept pushing me to do something with my personal brand. Because when you're first getting started, I still recommend everybody like, hey, start with a niche. But then once you kind of have your podcast legs, your sea legs under you, then you can maybe experiment with expanding that niche or expanding the audience that you're talking to. So that was really what the intention was behind it, but I didn't want to call it like the Travis Chapell Show. I just didn't like the idea of doing that. I have a good reputation in my circles, but I'm not well known enough for people to know what that means or who I am or any of those things. And so it was like, how can we use my name while at the same time making sure that we talk about the thing that we talk about a lot, which is relationships. And so it ended up becoming Travis Makes Friends. And we like the name because it still talks about, kind of networking. And the whole idea is, look, we did this show, Build Your Network, for 800 episodes. And if we learned anything about networking, it's that it shouldn't be treated as a different activity than making friends. Networking is just making friends if you're doing it the right way. A lot of people do networking the wrong way, which is where networking gets this kind of slimy type of connotation to it, because people imagine this person with 1,000 fresh press business cards and their plaid suit at a networking event, throwing business cards at people's faces, not hearing or caring about whatever anybody else has to say, but just regurgitating this elevator pitch to as many people as they possibly can, hoping they're going to get some business out of it. That's the wrong way to network. And we were like, look, we don't even agree with the term networking, but it's in our own name. And it was just like, we got to do something about this. Yeah. So it became Travis Makes Friends, which is now what it is. It allows us to have a little bit of a broader audience and allows me, more importantly, to talk to a wider spectrum of guests on the show. Something that's really important to me. Last month, instead of talking to only entrepreneurs or authors or whatever, it's like we had a couple of those people, but we also had a couple of comedians on the show. We had a couple of athletes on the show. We were able just to bring on a wider range of more, I guess, interesting to me individuals, people that I've been wanting to talk to for a long time. But like, if you approach some of these guests and you're like, oh yeah, my show's called Build Your Network, they just like, nah, it's not really my thing. I don't really want to talk about networking or whatever. But it's like Travis Makes Friends. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I can talk about, friendship or, whatever else you want to talk about. So the majority of the show is just me getting to know them as a person. And it's literally just like me making friends with them and then bringing other people into the conversation. So we get to, talk to people who, we've talked to a comedian that normally is just doing a bit. If they have a podcast, they're just always doing constant bits. They're bringing their friends on. They're making people laugh the whole episode. They don't talk a lot about their backstory or where they came from or why they do what they do. And so, we have the ability to kind of pull back the curtain and highlight some things for some of the people who bring on the show that maybe don't really go into those places a lot. So yeah, I think it's, it really more fully encapsulates what my mission is. And then also, like I said, enables us to not just have a broader listener base, but a broader guest list as well.
And did that relight your fire? Because you mentioned that it was kind of like, I was getting to be like, I don't want to do this. Did that like reignite something in you?
Yeah, absolutely it did. There's no question. Because like I said, it was getting to the point where I was like, we just need to stop doing this. Like I said, it wasn't growing. It was actually going down. It was like, our sponsorship revenue isn't anything to write home about at this point. Maybe we should need to shut it down for a while until I really can do what I want to do. Or I do what I want to do now. And say like, deal with whatever consequences might come along with that. But it absolutely, reignited that passion because I didn't do any guest outreach. Like one of the things I'm best at and one of the things that I became known for, and frankly, one of the things that I enjoy the most is getting people to say yes to an interview that I never thought would say yes to an interview. And I didn't do that at all for like a year and a half. I was only taking majority was like inbound people. And I sound like such a a-hole when I'm saying this stuff, but I don't mean it that way. All the people that I talked to were still amazing people doing really great things, but you know how it is as a podcast host. It's just different. Like some people you're just like, wow, I'm super excited that I get to talk to this person and have this conversation and ask these questions. And sometimes you have somebody in the calendar that's, oh, this should be interesting. We'll see how it goes. You know what I mean? So it got to the point where like my team was vetting all the requests and bringing people in. So I was doing less work because my work on the business was required more often. So my team was like, vetting people, saying yes, saying no. So I would just like show up on recording day and have 5 interviews on my calendar, not know any of them, have to do like a little bit of pre-research ahead of time to be like, okay, what does this person do? Why are they on the show? What are we talking about? It just became a drag on my energy and my time. And it was just something that was the opposite of why I started it, which was to do what I wanted to do, to talk to people I wanted to talk to and to have interesting and fun conversations. And it became the opposite of all of those things.
That's something that I learned and like, I know that wasn't the meaning behind your course last year or your mastermind, but that was one of the things that I learned and took out of there was go after some of those people. Like it's okay to branch out a little bit. And, I got 2 people in my top 10. You were in one of my top 10. JLD was in one of my top 10 and he was on last week. And
awesome. I think good for you.
What you're saying is so important because so many people, again, the show is called Cure for Pod Fade. And so many people get to that, I'm stuck. Most of us are podcasters that are already here. They're the people that have been doing this, not seeing that growth. And it can be that simple shift of like, what do I want to do? And I think Absolutely. I just need to re-say that because that's so important for people to hear.
Yeah, I think that's almost the ultimate cure for pod fade. And by the way, I love the topic of the show because this is probably one of the biggest needs for podcasters is that I think there's over 4 million indexed podcasts now and less than 200,000 of them are active. I want to say those are the latest numbers, which is wild to me. Good for you for trying to get out there and help people that are struggling with this. And frankly, I do think this is one of the reasons is that you're just no longer excited about it. When you first heard about it and you first started doing it, it's like, oh, this is so much fun and it's exciting and I got this person on, we're going to talk about this and it was so much fun. And then you release it and nobody listens and you're like, hey, this is less fun. You know what I mean? So if you're one of the people that made it past the first 30 episodes or 50 episodes, then you're already in the top percentile of people because most shows quit before they reach episode 7, I believe. So if you're already at 25 or 30, hey, good for you. You've gotten through like the difficult part where it's like, what am I doing? I don't even know what my show is. I have to edit these episodes. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to publish. Like you're already past kind of like the initial like huge learning curve that comes along with it. So now you're getting tempted to start, heading into pod fade at this moment in time. And if that's you, then it's probably just, you gotta revisit the why. Why are you doing this? What's the goal in 5 years from now? Not what's the goal in 3 months from now, but what's the goal in 5 years from now? And then you got to look at what you can do to reinvigorate that initial excitement that you had when you were doing it and ask yourself, if I didn't make money on this for 3 more years, is that an acceptable situation for me? Do I enjoy doing this enough to where I'm okay with that result? I'm okay with that being the end result. And then like, if the answer is no, then you either switch up the content that you're doing, or maybe you should quit. Maybe you should stop because it's not going to get any easier or better. And like, if you're not even excited about your show, how do you expect your listeners to be excited about your show? Even if you have 54 of them, if you're not excited, they will tell. They will absolutely be able to tell. And they're going to go find somebody else who is excited about the stuff that they're putting out there. Like you have to have the excitement of having 3 million people listen to your podcast when you have 300 people listening to your podcast, or you'll never get to 3 million.
Oh, yeah. I'm still one of the baby podcasters. We're still working on getting up past that 1,000 mark. But that was one of the things that I learned. And for me, it's just that. It's the excitement. When the excitement's there, the clients follow. The listenership goes up. But when you start to fade out, it's just like status, like blah.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, you don't want to be there.
No. And one of the things I wanted to ask, because I noticed when you look back at your show, you were very consistent. And then before this change, you took a break. That is terrifying for most of us podcasters. What was it like in that 2 months to say, hey, I got to step back. I'm rebranding. I don't know what it looks like to actually take a break in something that you've built so much consistency with.
Yeah, it was interesting because that's like the number one piece of advice I give to everybody starting a show is be consistent for a long period of time. I say be painfully consistent is what I tell people. Yeah, it felt weird. It felt like against everything I've ever said to people, but I knew I needed the break. And the question to me became, I know this is what's coming. So the option is stop right now or continue just like doing these interviews for the sake of doing these interviews just so that I can release them and say that I didn't skip any weeks. And it was just like, this is stupid. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this just to like keep up pretense and like waste my time for the next 2 months when I could be spending that time thinking about what's going to come after this. So yeah, it just got to that point. I became okay with like, hey, yeah, we're probably going to I think we missed 2 full months of releases. And it was like, yeah, but I would rather miss 2 full months of releases than like half-ass the next, 16 interviews I do just because I want to be able to release, so that was exactly what we did is we just took 2 months off. And then I took those 2 months to really think about, like I said, the rebranding, the name. We spent a lot of time on the name and what we were going to like really focus on moving forward. And then we started batching interviews for the rebrand as well. So we got, like 15, 20 interviews on the books that were actually like, what's crazy about it is like the first dozen interviews that I did for the show, I didn't even know what the name of the show was going to be. I just started saying stuff like, welcome back to the show, or here on the show, we do this. I didn't even say the name of the show because I didn't know what the name of the show was going to be. I just knew that it wasn't going to be Build Your Network, and I knew it wasn't going to be the Travis Chapell Show. So I just did interviews and was just like, we'll see what happens. You know what I mean? But yeah, it was more important to me to start caring more about the content. And I knew that we were going to be dropping some ad spend in January on increasing our listenership. So I wasn't super worried about, hey, we might lose another 10, 15% right now, but I think we're going to grow by a significant number next month, which we ended up growing from October, which was the last month that we were releasing consistently, to January. I want to say we increased listenership by like 250% in that period. So yeah, I think it ended up working out okay.
So worst case scenario, because most people, again, I kind of want to just go into this, it's okay to pause sometimes to rebrand. Like, I'm sure there was a lot of these worst case scenarios. If you knew it was coming back, but you had to have complete faith, what would you tell somebody who's on that verge of like, okay, I can't continue on this path, but I'm not ready to give up this growth, this potential, like my listeners, we've trained them to listen every week. What happens to them?
It kind of depends on your release schedule too, because we're doing we did 3 episodes a week for a really long time. And, like I said, for me, it was like, I'm not going to do another 24 interviews on my show just because I want to keep up pretense and release consistently for these next 2 months. If you're doing 1 a week, then hey, maybe keep it going. You could knock out 8 interviews in 2 recording days and still release for 2 months. It's not as big of a deal. And if this is like your full-time thing or you don't have as many things going on, for me, it was like, I have a software company, I have a marketing agency, I have 2 small kids and a wife. And then, we have year-end goals and quarterly reviews, and I'm trying to get my health. Health is always a priority for me. So I'm spending time at the gym, and I'm running these businesses, and I have the podcast, and we're rebranding the podcast. We got to do more episodes for the new podcast. It was just like the bottom of the priority list was continuing to create content I already didn't want to create for my old podcast that I knew wasn't going to exist soon. It was just like so out of the question for me. So the question really became like, do we start a new RSS feed or do we rebrand and continue on the same RSS feed? That really became the question. And we decided, like, you know what, if I kept this going just for the sake of keeping it going, my mind wouldn't be in it, my attitude wouldn't be in it, and everybody was going to be able to tell, and it would still continue to be a drag on me and my time. And so it just didn't make sense. So we're just like, look, we have a bunch of subscribers and things at this current RSS feed. Let's just keep it here and, basically be okay with the fact that we might be starting over. But if we're starting over with a bang. And we're not, like I said, if I'm spending tens of thousands of dollars on advertising to bring in listeners to the podcast, it's much better that there's 800 plus episodes for them to listen to rather than bringing them into an RSS feed that has 8 episodes if we're launching them that way. You know what I mean? So it just made sense to be like, hey, why don't we just bring them back to this feed because they can go back to 2017 and listen to episodes if they really want to.
Yeah. And I think that because of how you've learned from your show to change the show from networking to building friendships, I think that for me, when I saw the change, I was like, this makes sense. This makes sense to me because it is like networking, like you said, was such this like skeezy, gross word. But it's all about friendship. And it's all about, like right now, like I interacted with you. You were my mentor. Now I get to have these extra conversations with you. And I think that's what it is. It's building, yes, your network, but it's actually treating a human like a human.
Yeah, right. Which to me, it's at the core of networking. It's the same activity. Like you shouldn't be doing things differently when you're like going to the bar to hang out with your buddies and throw darts and drink beer. And then going like the next day and dressing completely different, doing your hair completely different, becoming and behaving like a completely different person and having all these business cards and barfing out an elevator pitch on people. And like feel like when you go hang out with your buddies at the bar, it's an energizing event. When you go to a networking event and pitch a bunch of people you don't know, it's an energy drain and you don't want to do it. And it's the reason you want to do it is because like you're turning something that should be fun and engaging, which is like meeting new people, and you're turning it into like a really terrible activity. And I'm an introvert. When I say these types of things, people think I'm an extrovert because I teach a lot about friendships and relationships and networking and communication, all that stuff. But the reason why it's so important to me is because I am an introvert. And so that's also why I'm so big on building your personal brand and getting your brand out there, because I would rather people come up to me than me have to go other people. And the bigger your brand gets, the more you're attracting people to come want to connect with you rather than you having to be the one to always go out and connect with other people. But that's kind of like step 2. Step 1 is stop treating these as 2 separate activities. It's the same thing.
And is this kind of like going through the mission, not that it exactly aligned with your podcast, but how you ended up creating Guestio was to create these, I don't know, I'm going to call them like meetup networks almost, where it took the scariness out.
Yeah, exactly. It's that everything goes together. It's like we teach connecting and podcasting and relationships and interviewing and communication, all this stuff. And as Guestio is like the perfect tool to add to all of that because it just enables people to be able to do it more effectively and gives the most space to be able to do it. So it wasn't even super intentional. It was just kind of like, this is what I believe in and there's no tool that exists for this. So let me build something that I think is going to be helpful for people that have a similar philosophy to the one that I have.
Yeah. And there's so many, I mean, like I said, before meeting you and like being in your space, I would have never reached out. I would have just had you guys sitting on my top 10 list forever. But your platform really created a space that for me, it didn't feel as scary. You got to know them. You got to pitch. You made it personal too, because you can add video or voice messages. And again, it's adding that personal connection, like Travis making friends.
Exactly. Yep. 100%. Yeah. It's just giving you a little bit of an edge, which goes a long way in a lot of contexts.
Yeah. So my question for you, because we're talking about pod fade, rebranding, what is the one ingredient you would want to add to the cure for pod fade?
I mean, I know this isn't an ideal world because not everybody has, excess funds, but it's advertising. Is the answer. I mean, the only way to guarantee that your show is going to grow is if you spend money to make it grow. Assuming you've already patched up the holes, right? Assuming you're already creating good content, assuming you're already consistent with that content, assuming that your branding's okay, you have a decent website, you have a decent podcast artwork, you have a few ratings and reviews, like assuming all of that's buttoned up and on board, the only real way to make sure that your show is going to grow on a much higher level, especially if you're stuck under 200 downloads an episode. If you're under 200 downloads an episode, the easy cure for you to move up to closer to 1,000 downloads an episode is advertising. So you got to be willing to spend some money on advertising. The nice thing about podcasting is like you have an opportunity to make it back. If you can keep up the listenership over a longer period of time, you can start monetizing through sponsorships and make some of that money back, or build a coaching program and make some money back through there. But if you don't have excess funds and you need a way to make more money, I mean, I really highly recommend building a business on the back end of the podcast, growing that business through the podcast, and then dedicating a percentage of every dollar you make from the business to put directly back into advertising the podcast. That's the formula to me. Make some decent money. So, build a coaching program, whether it's $1,000 or $10,000, build something that you can make a little bit of like real cash flow on. A coaching business, consulting business, you sell knowledge or information, or an agency, a service, like I'll run your social media for you. I'll chop up your podcast content for you. I'll edit your podcast for you. Some sort of service, an agency service, or some sort of like coaching or knowledge-based business. These are really duplicatable businesses. There's a lot of people that teach how to build successful businesses doing this. Use your podcast as the lead in. And then, if you made $3,000 in revenue this month, or you made $30,000 in revenue this month, 5%, 10%, 30%, whatever you can afford off the top before you pay yourself or anybody else goes directly back into advertising the podcast and growing your download numbers. That's the formula. And
when you're talking advertising, you're not talking like Facebook. We're talking podcast player advertising. I just want to make sure that's clear, because I didn't know when I first started, and I threw so much money at Facebook and Instagram.
Anything on podcast. Yep. Anything on podcasts, whether it's a platform like Overcast or on another podcast that has the audience that you want. Advertise where podcasters or where podcast listeners are listening, which is on podcasts. So, advertise on other people's podcasts, or advertise on podcast media players, or advertise at podcast conferences. Be where podcast listeners are. And yeah, that's going to be the answer. The nice thing is, like I said, if you're at 45 downloads an episode, you want to get to 1,000, it doesn't cost that much to get to 1,000 downloads an episode if you're at 45. It costs a good amount to go from 1,000 to 10,000, which is really like that to me is like the threshold. If you can get to 10,000 downloads an episode, you can build in decent sponsorship and monetization. Like you can monetize decently from sponsorships and revenue like that. Because once you get to 10,000 an episode, it becomes a matter of, okay, well, how many impressions can I give the advertiser? That's the name of the game. So if you're at one episode a week and you're getting 10,000 downloads an episode, then okay, if I get to 5 episodes a week at 10,000 downloads an episode, now I've quintupled my ability to serve impressions to an audience from this advertiser, which quintuples my ad revenue. You know what I mean? So those are the things that I would be thinking about is like, can I get to 1,000 downloads an episode and can I monetize it all? Coaching, build a business, sponsorships, whatever. A percentage of all of that goes directly back into growing the show until you get to 10,000 an episode. And that's really where you unlock the next level of podcasting where it's, oh, now I'm not just making $400 this month from sponsorships, but I'm making $4,000 this month from sponsorships. Depending on how many you're releasing, you might be making $10, $12, $15,000 this month from sponsorships alone, not even counting coaching programs or consulting or your back-end agency business or whatever it is, whatever else you have going on. But yeah, you got to be willing to say goodbye to some money for a while in order to say hello to some money for a longer period of time. But if it was easy, everybody would do it if it was easy. You got to be willing to do the stuff that most people aren't willing to do if you want to get the results that most people are never going to get.
Right. And that's like we were talking about is there's 4 million podcasts out there, but 250 or something, 100,000 that are actually active because it is work. We have this fantasy marketing that it's show up, do all the guest appearances, do one guest appearance, make $200,000. It's not like that. And I know that I'll refer to some of the episodes that I've heard you on that you've talked about this, like how many times you've guested and done the things until you started seeing that constant growth.
Yeah, that's why you got to revisit the why. Kind of what we said earlier. It is a lot of work. So what's your why for doing this? Because if it's not good, it probably isn't going to be worth the effort that you're going to have to put in to make it successful. For me, the why is I don't want to be, I will likely not be like operating and building businesses for the rest of my life. I would like to be able to crack the formula, build a couple of businesses, exit those businesses, and just come in and out as I decide to, and then invest my money into passive cash flowing assets like multifamily real estate, commercial real estate, and things like that. So if I could, in 5 years from now, be making as much or more as my businesses make me now, just directly from sponsorship revenue on a podcast and YouTube monetization on views, then that's a really great scenario for me. And to me, worth all of the work and effort and investment and money and time that I've put into doing this, because that's such an awesome potential outcome for me that I'm willing to do all of the work that it takes to get there. So you have to ask yourself that same question. What do you like? If you could make $10,000 a month just from podcast ad revenue, what is that worth to you? If you're listening to this right now, you ask yourself that question. What's that worth to me? $10,000 a month. How would that change your life completely? If the answer is yes, and you want it that bad, then all of a sudden it becomes worth it to take that $5,000 that you were going to spend on a new entertainment system and drop it into podcast advertising, or to take that $10,000 you were going to put down on your $50,000 car and say, you know what, I can drive this car for another 18 months. I'd rather put that into podcast advertising. That's literally the decision that I make on a daily basis, is all the big purchases that tempt most people. I look at it now and I'm just like, I would rather put this money into something that's going to make me constant money, continuously into the future until I decide I don't want it anymore, rather than buying a new TV or a new couch or getting the nice car that I want or any of those things. Why would I do that until I have this machine that's printing cash for me every month? Until then, I'm just going to put it into that machine. Does that mean that some months I'm going to waste money? Yeah. Does that mean I'm going to try advertising that doesn't work and I'm going to spend 20 grand on this particular, advertising channel when it was really only worth 8,000 and I just lost $12,000? Yeah, that happens. And it has happened to me a bunch. But at the end of the day, still looking at that final goal of wow, if I can make 100 grand a month and in pure advertising revenue, which is 100% profit, if I could make 100 grand a month doing that, everything that I'm doing now becomes worth it to me. Even if I lost 200 grand, 300 grand, 500 grand to get to that point, if I lost $500,000 and in 3 years from now, my show is generating $100,000 a month, I made it back in 5 months. All of the money I lost in the last 8 years up to that, I made it back in 5 months because the outcome is that good. You know what I'm saying? You got to revisit that why every once in a while and ask yourself, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And is the goal worthy of being achieved?
And I think you made a good point, which immediately made me think of like, we'll spend that much money on a master's degree, 6 years of our time, $175,000 in debt. And that has no guarantee. I walked out with that and I'm like, hey, hire me. And they're like, how about minimum wage?
Yeah.
Where this is something that's setting yourself up.
Here's a $40,000 salary that you're going to have to earn for the next 40 years. And if you're lucky, you could get to 100,000 by the time you're done. Even though in 40 years from now, 100,000 will be like the new 40,000, or really probably will be the new 10,000 with the rate of inflation as much as it is right now. So, yeah, right. It's just understanding of what am I getting to? What am I willing to put in to be able to get there?
So do you have a favorite advertiser that you would recommend for the little guy to start?
Overcast might be a good one because you can buy like pretty cheap ads on there, anywhere from, I don't know, $100 to $1,000 that you can spend. And it gives you like the average CPM on the other side, or CPA on the other side of it, like cost per acquisition on your subscriber. It's a little bit on the expensive side, but the people that come in from there tend to be pretty high quality subscribers or listeners. And it's self-serve. You can go in, you can spend as little or as much as you want to spend. So that might be a really good place for people. Like I said, if you're at 150 downloads an episode and you don't have, a business that's generating 7 figures where you can go spend 50 grand in ads, like, let's take $300 this month and put it into the podcast and see a little bit of a bump. It's just, there's something that cures pod fade when you look at your numbers every month and see it growing. It gives you hope. You know what I mean? Even if you have to force that number to grow, then freaking force it to grow until it starts growing on its own. No, like the odds of people finding you with a podcast are just so low because podcast discovery is garbage. It's not like YouTube. It's not like it's not TikTok. It's not some of these other platforms. The audience is much more valuable in my opinion, but the work to build the audience is much higher.
So do the work, put the time in, spend the ads, and ask yourself why. That's exactly. So many great ingredients for pod fade.
100%.
So where can people get in touch with you, find you? Do you have anything fun coming out we should know about?
Yeah, Travis Makes Friends is really the best place if you want to check out the show. Whatever podcast app you're listening to right now, Travis Makes Friends, just look it up there and leave a quick rating review. We'd love to hear from you. And then anything else, just go to travischappell.com, CHAPPELL, travischappell.com. All of our social links and email and YouTube and everything is over there. So you can find everything at travischappell.com.
I'm so excited, and I'm definitely going to put Guestio in the show notes also because, like I said, it really does kind of take that pitching portion, going back to the guesting part. It's not as scary. It's welcoming. It feels good. And I'm so grateful for what you've created. And I'm grateful that you're creating, like, I call it a tsunami. You're not a ripple maker. You're a tsunami maker where you're taking back the word networking and making it a friendship.
Thank you so much for saying that, Jennifer. And I really appreciate you going through the program and having me on the show as well.
Thank you for being here.